King Charles confessed everything, but it was too late for Diana to forgive. At the age of 70, with power firmly in his grasp, the throne beneath his feet, and the crown finally his after a lifetime of waiting, King Charles should have been the happiest man in Britain. But fate, like a cruel director, waited for the exact moment he seemed to be at his peak to deliver a merciless verdict: illness. There was nothing left to hide, no more time for self-deception, and no strength to keep living under the royal veneer painted by palace press releases and rehearsed smiles. In that moment of facing himself, Charles collapsed under a haunting truth that had followed him 4 decades. He had betrayed Diana. Not merely a betrayal of body or affection, but a betrayal of trust, of the dream that a young girl once placed in him the day she stepped into the palace like a chosen Cinderella. Charles admitted it. In a private evening, with no press, no advisors, no Camilla, he looked at an old photo of Diana, her eternally sorrowful eyes still seeming to question him, and uttered words he himself may never have expected to summon the courage to say, "It was all my fault. I know what I did, and I'm sorry, but now it was too late, because that woman was no longer here to forgive, and perhaps she never intended to forgive at all." In 1980, at the Windsor Polo Grounds, as the summer sun cast a gentle golden hue over freshly trimmed grass, Prince Charles, then just 22 years old, laid eyes on Camilla Shan for the first time. She was not the symbol of traditional royal beauty, and that was exactly what made her stand out. Camilla had a radiant smile, eyes that gleamed with boldness, and a free spirit that no cage could contain. From the very first moment, Charles was drawn in, not by regal elegance, but by the energy Camilla exuded: natural, approachable, and a little rebellious. They began to talk, rode horses together, walked along the banks of the Thames during late afternoons, where the sunset dyed the waters red, and Camilla's laughter shattered the solemnity typically associated with royalty. The love came quickly, passionately, and somewhat innocently. Charles, who had lived his entire life in a world bound by protocol and rigid rules, found in Camilla a door to the real world. Not the dull ceremonies or scripted conversations prepared by secretaries, but spontaneous jokes, mischievous glances, and a feeling of simply being himself. With Camilla, Charles was not the heir to the throne, but just a young man learning how to love. But royal love has never been simple, especially not when the person in question did not fit the standards set by the monarchy. Camilla, by the silent judgment of the royal family, was too ordinary, too free, and more importantly, not pure enough an image to become a future queen. Her family background lacked nobility. Her romantic past was not clean enough, and her liberal lifestyle made the royal advisors shake their heads. In their eyes, Camilla could never stand beside Charles at a future coronation. She could never be the symbol of the United Kingdom. An unspoken order was issued, and Prince Charles, raised in the habit of obedience, was forced to choose. At 22, he did not have the strength to stand against a centuries-old machine of power. Under pressure from both his mother, Queen Elizabeth, and close advisors, Charles was convinced that the relationship would not only damage his personal reputation, but also undermine the image of the monarchy. And so, in silence, without any official announcement or public farewell, Charles let go of Camilla. Camilla, though heartbroken, did not cry or beg. She understood the game she could never win. Shortly after, she married Andrew Parker Bowles, a charming military officer and former friend of Charles, as a way to close that royal love chapter full of wounds. But did she truly move on? Or was she merely building herself an escape from a still bleeding scar? Royal historian Lady Bridget Rokesby once remarked, "The decision to force Charles to break up with Camilla in 1970 laid the foundation for a tragedy that spanned 50 years. It was not just an intervention into someone's personal life, but into their emotions, something the royal family has always underestimated." Charles then continued his royal journey like a programmed soldier. Relationships came and went, but no one could ever replace Camilla in his heart. And when he was arranged to marry Diana Spencer, a young, beautiful, pure girl, perfect by royal standards, his heart still never belonged to her. That was the beginning of one of the most tragic marriages in modern British history. A marriage that Charles himself, in a rare moment of candor with a close journalist, once called a golden woven lie. Charles did what every royal family member was expected to do: obey. But in his heart, Camilla never left. Every letter, every secret phone call, every reunion in the shadows was like a thread pulling him back to the place where he once felt like himself. Diana, though young and inexperienced, was not foolish. She knew. She felt it. And the pain slowly ate away at her day by day. That woman beneath the dazzling flashbulbs still maintained her gentle smile. But behind the glamour were nights of crying herself dry over a husband who did not love her and over a third person who never disappeared. If in 1970 the royal family had not interfered, would history have turned out differently? If Charles had been free to love, would Diana have had to endure such a tragic fate? And if Camilla had been accepted from the beginning, could all the wounds that followed have been avoided? No one can answer that. But one thing is certain: that fateful breakup not only separated two people, but set off a domino chain of collapse known as the royal tragedy. Charles, benched at 75, having finally worn the crown and sat upon the throne he had waited for all his life, perhaps now fully understands the price of not fighting for love. That price was not the loss of Camilla, for in the end, they found their way back to each other, but the price that Diana had to pay. That girl was pushed into a loveless marriage, hounded to death by the prying eyes of the public, and in the end, left this world in a car crash, still surrounded by questions. She was never truly loved, never chosen for who she was, and never forgiven for a crime she never committed. And when Charles confessed everything, facing the photo of his late wife, it was no longer just a confession for himself, but a silent indictment of the monarchy itself, a system that once forced, denied love, and dismissed emotion, now forced to confront the consequences of its own decisions. Camilla, once seen as the other woman, is now queen. But in the eyes of the public, she has never truly been forgiven. And Charles, no matter how many apologies he makes, can never erase the image of a lonely Diana, silently departing the world in a shattered car beneath a Paris tunnel. A death that shook all of Britain and left a stain on him, even as king, that will never fade. Perhaps Charles knows this. And perhaps, in his heart, Diana's voice still echoes somewhere, not with blame, not with hatred, but with one unspoken question. If you loved me, why did you leave me alone? Now, it is all too late. Forgiveness is a luxury when wounds have been etched deep into history, and Charles's confession, no matter how sincere, cannot erase one truth: when love is sacrificed for power, the price is always the most painful. In 1980, when Charles turned 31, it seemed the world had grown impatient with the prince's tangled love life. His forbidden relationship with Camilla Shand had faded into the shadows, leaving a quiet void in the heart of the heir to the throne. But the palace could not wait forever. In an era when the royal image was facing challenges from a changing society, what they needed was a perfect bride. And that was when the name Lady Diana Spencer began to be mentioned as a solution, a miracle, perhaps even a political salvation. Diana was only 19 at the time. A young girl from the old aristocratic Spencer family, distantly related to the royal house, beautiful, shy, but radiating the gentle elegance of the English countryside. She was not only the embodiment of the ideal appearance the monarchy sought, but also carried within her a kind heart and an astonishing sensitivity, qualities that even Charles did not foresee would become the root of such deep tragedy. They met at a party at Althorpe, the Spencer family estate. Diana appeared like a fresh breeze, making Charles, the man still wounded by a forbidden love, feel a glimmer of light in the cold hallway of fate. Charles was drawn in. But was it true love, or merely the feeling of temporary healing? For a man whose heart still held the shadow of Camilla, Diana may have been nothing more than a soothing remedy. for the royal family. However, Diana was the precious gem they had waited far too long for. From the beginning, she was seen as the ideal candidate for the role of Princess Pure, aristocratic, free of scandal, and adored by the public. The Queen Mother, and the entire royal media machinery all but pressured Charles into making a decision, and he, once again, surrendered. The wedding took place on July 29, 1981, a globally televised event watched by hundreds of millions, hailed as the wedding of the century. Diana, in her billowing fairy tale-like wedding gown, entered St. Paul's Cathedral to the sound of ringing bells and the awed gazes of the world. But few knew that behind the bride's gentle smile was a suffocating sense of confusion. As for the groom, Prince Charles, his expression would later be described by body language experts as both reluctant and vacant. Royal expert Tom Bower once commented that marriage was orchestrated to appease public opinion, to put an end to past scandals, and to craft a new image for the British royal family. But it wasn't love. It was a contract bearing the mark of pain. During the honeymoon itself, Diana discovered the lingering and never disappearing presence of Camilla. A bracelet engraved with the letters F and G that Charles intended to give Camilla was found by Diana, and that was only one of many signs proving that the other woman still existed in her husband's mind. Charles couldn't hide his inner turmoil. As a man of duty, he married Diana because he was expected to, but as a man filled with emotion and personal longing, he could never let go of Camilla. Secret phone calls, clandestine meetings, knowing glances exchanged between him and the woman already married continued even after he had sworn vows beside his new wife. Diana, once a naive girl entering royalty, was slowly isolated within the very palace that dazzled the world. No one stood by her. Every concern, every doubt was dismissed with remarks like, "You're imagining things. This is your duty as a princess." Or worse, just smile and wave. The happy family photos, the international tours, the courteous handshakes, they were all part of the grand stage curtain. Masking a bitter truth, Charles had never truly loved his wife. He loved Camilla, and Diana knew it. She knew it from very early on, but she didn't leave. She believed that if she tried hard enough, if she were gentler, more perfect, maybe she could reach her husband's heart. But that heart had never been there. Diana began to change. From a shy girl, she became stronger. She learned how to face things, how to resist, how to fight to protect her own emotions. But the more she tried, the more she was hurt. Charles, meanwhile, became increasingly distant, cryptic, and at times cruel to the point of coldness. On more than one occasion, he made remarks that deeply wounded her. At a private party, he once told Diana, "Don't try to be someone you're not. I love someone else." That sentence was like a knife slicing through the dream of happiness held by a woman barely in her 20s. Their relationship quickly fell apart. The media still saw them appear together, still saw them smiling at each other, but those inside the royal family knew it was just an act. Camilla was still the one Charles turned to in order to feel like himself. And Diana, little by little, was pushed farther away from the heart of the monarchy. Even as in the eyes of the public, she became more and more a symbol of compassion and approachability. Diana's pain did not come solely from her husband's betrayal, but also from the indifference of an entire system. The palace did not protect her. The media first glorified her, then turned to scrutinizing her. And the man she had trusted to love her until the end, the one who had placed a wedding ring on her finger before millions, was the very person who made her feel most alone. Charles, torn between duty and emotion, between Diana and Camilla, lacked the courage to make a decisive choice. He continued to live a double life, maintaining the image of an ideal royal family, while inside, he was a mess of unresolved emotions. And it was this indecisiveness that pushed all three people into a tragedy from which no one could escape. Royal psychologist Eleanor Blanchard once said, "If Charles had been braver, If he had dared to fight to love Camilla from the very beginning, perhaps Diana wouldn't have become a victim. But he didn't do that. And the consequence was a long chain of heartbreak that lasted for decades. Beneath the luxurious and perfect facade of a royal marriage, the truth revealed a tragedy more cruel than any script Diana could have imagined. Just a few years after the wedding of the century that had stirred the hearts of millions around the world, the marriage of Prince Charles and Princess Diana plummeted into the abyss. The photos of them holding hands, the joint appearances at official events, now nothing more than a thin layer of powder, masking a cold reality. Charles had never broken off his relationship with Camilla. In the shadows, when the doors of Buckingham Palace closed, Charles continued to secretly contact his former lover. Late-night phone calls, handwritten letters passed through loyal aides, secret getaways from prying eyes to meet Camilla at a secluded estate. All of this happened while Diana struggled to live up to the mold of a princess, always having to smile, to stand tall, to wave at the right moments, and to pretend as though she were living a dream. But Diana was not blind. She sensed that something was wrong from the earliest days of her royal life. Every time she turned to Charles, his gaze was elsewhere. Every time he held her hand, it felt cold and distant. She began to question. She became wary. And then, with her trademark sensitivity, she uncovered the truth piece by piece, like shards of broken glass stabbing into her self-respect. The moment Diana saw the gold bracelet engraved with the initials F and G, short for Fred and Gladys, the pet names Charles and Camilla used for each other, was the moment all her illusions completely collapsed. It wasn't just a gift. It was living proof of a relationship that had never ended. A bracelet, but one that weighed like a sentence for a marriage into which she had poured her entire heart. Diana fell apart, but she was not allowed to show it. Every tear, every ounce of anger had to be hidden inside the cold rooms of the palace, where there was no one she could trust, no shoulder to lean on. Even when she spoke up to members of her husband's family, all she received were indifferent glances and hollow advice. You have to accept it, because this is the royal family. They spoke of duty, of honor, of image, but no one spoke of the real feelings of a woman who had been betrayed. In that utter loneliness, Diana began a silent battle with herself. Eating disorders became her way of reclaiming control over her life. She began eating erratically, then vomiting, then starving herself. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw a Diana that was disappearing. But she couldn't stop. It was the only thing she could control in a world where everything from her hair, her clothes, to even her facial expressions was decided by others. The pressure from the media only made things worse. At first, Diana was the princess of everyone's hearts, a perfect role model adored by the public. But later, when rumors of a fractured marriage began to leak, the press suddenly turned. They followed her every step, hunted for the slightest change in expression, fabricated internal stories, and slapped on her all sorts of labels: the unstable princess, the unfit mother, the ghost of the palace. Meanwhile, Charles still maintained the dignified and exemplary image of the heir to the throne, even though in his heart, Camilla had never left. Royal psychologist Eleanor Blanchard, who had studied the emotional lives of royal family members, remarked, emotional betrayal is the deepest wound. It doesn't just destroy trust, it slowly erodes the victim's very sense of identity. For Diana, that wound was too deep to heal on its own. She became unstable, lost her sense of direction, and fell into a prolonged depression. There were days she couldn't get out of bed. There were nights she cried in silence until morning. But the most painful part was no one noticed, or worse, no one truly cared. The distance between Charles and Diana grew increasingly vast. Their joint photographs became awkward. Ceremonies and banquets turned into chilling battlegrounds. They avoided looking at each other. They avoided touching. Every word they uttered was stiff, scripted. The public began to notice, and the media wasted no time exploiting this tragedy as a long-running drama series. And Camilla, she remained present like an inescapable shadow. Even after marrying Andrew Parker Bowles, she maintained a close connection with Charles, as if there had never been any interruption. Many inside the royal family believed Camilla had never truly left the prince's life, and Diana, a young, lonely woman, trapped in the ritual mold, never stood a chance in that emotional struggle. It was no coincidence that in a later interview, Diana uttered the shocking sentence, "There are three of us in this marriage, so it's a bit crowded." That wasn't a complaint, it was an accusation. A painful declaration of a truth that the royal family had tried to conceal for nearly a decade. In the public's heart, Diana increasingly became a symbol of courage and honesty. She didn't hide her pain, didn't stage a fake life, and refused to live by others' expectations. But that, in the eyes of the monarchy, a power built on image and control, made her all the more dangerous. Diana and Charles's marriage wasn't just a broken romance. It was a lesson in the cruelty of responsibility, the price of fame, and the impotence of love when suffocated behind cold walls. Diana hoped to be loved for who she was, but she received only deception wrapped in royal ceremonies. And as Charles became more openly affectionate with Camilla, Diana refused to remain silent. She began resisting with words, with actions, with interviews that shook the palace. But above all, she resisted by redefining herself not as a princess, but as a human. And Charles, caught in the eye of the storm of public outrage and national resentment, stood firm. He never apologized publicly. He never admitted fault. Because in his world, love never had the right to triumph over duty. And that was the greatest tragedy. For Diana, it was far too late. Her heart had fractured, her trust betrayed, and the love she once felt for Charles was reduced to painful shards. She didn't die for love, she died because of unfulfilled expectations. In that story, Charles was not just a failed husband, he became the symbol of a system that abandoned the woman it once glorified. A royal marriage, a bracelet engraved with two lovers' names, a woman pushed to her limit, and a tragedy preordained before the first promise could even take shape. This was no fairy tale. It was the truth the world is still trying to understand today. Beneath the glitter of crown and title, a silent tragedy was stirring. By 1986, all moral and public barriers collapsed when Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles, two people trapped in unhappy marriages, officially reunited. Not in Buckingham Palace, not at a lavish banquet, but at Highgrove, Charles's private estate in Gloucestershire. There, amidst quiet gardens and old brick walls, their forbidden love quietly rekindled, fierce, audacious, and defiant. Afternoon horseback rides, handwritten letters filling page after page in careful script, secret rendezvous behind heavy iron gates, all meticulously orchestrated to stay out of the media's sight, and even Charles's wife's awareness. But Diana wasn't naive. A betrayed woman's heart is unrelentingly sensitive. She began noticing small changes in her husband's behavior. Furtive looks, sudden work trips, whispered late-night calls. Then her suspicions were confirmed by a truth that shattered her heart. Charles had returned to Camilla. In unpublished diary pages shared years later by a close friend, Diana wrote, "I could forgive if he loved someone else, but I cannot forgive deceit that lasted for years." For Diana, this was not a marriage, it was a sentence of prolonged confinement. On one side stood a cold royal duty, on the other, perpetual loneliness. Meanwhile, Charles, instead of ending this destructive relationship to save his marriage, sank deeper into Camilla's arms, acting like a man escaping responsibility by embracing a love that had once been rejected. But none of the three triumphed. Even Camilla, the woman who once held Charles's heart from youth's dawn, plunged into a vortex of anguish. She was no traditional other woman, but a married mother of two maintaining a covert affair with the Prince of Wales, the husband of one of the world's most famous women. She knew the price of this choice: public outrage, societal scorn, and nightmares that she was destroying a family before the world's eyes. In a letter to a close friend, Camilla wrote, "I don't know who I am anymore. A lover, a wrecking force, or simply a weak woman drawn into an unbreakable love." In that contradiction, she agonized day after day. She didn't wish Charles harm, but her presence was the reason his family life collapsed. And Diana, a young, sensitive woman, quietly broke down day by day within the palace walls. Royal biographer Edmund Rossford, in Three in the Palace, affirmed Charles and Camilla's love wasn't a simple black and white story. It was a prolonged tragedy where every person was hurt, flawed, and unable to escape the shadow of a choice made long ago. Indeed, this love, though filled with passion and loyalty, resembled a double-edged sword, cutting deep into the hearts of three individuals, one slice at a time until nothing remained whole. Diana began to change. From a shy girl, she became a determined woman. She no longer awaited pity from the palace. She appeared before the public with meaningful eyes, meticulously prepared speeches, and a signature fashion style. Yet behind the flashbulbs, she remained a woman wrestling with betrayal, enduring a pain that never faded, haunted by the perpetual shadow of the woman named Camilla. Diana did not relent. She did not stay silent. She turned the media into a weapon to speak her truth, hints of another woman in her interviews, appearances laden with meaning at events, eyes challenging, smiles masked contempt. Charles understood, Camilla understood, and the palace was thrown into chaos. The reunion between Charles and Camilla became the worst-kept secret inside the royal family. Even though everyone knew the truth had long since leaked, the royal media advisors struggled to manage the public image of all three individuals. On one side was the Prince of Wales, suspected by the public of being two-faced. On another was Camilla, the woman the entire United Kingdom did not want to see. And at the center was Diana, the most beloved woman, but also a media bomb that could explode at any moment. At Highgrove, during quiet evenings, Charles and Camilla would still often sit together, drinking wine and discussing their favorite poems. They could forget about rank, duty, and public opinion if only for a few hours. But when daylight returned, they too had to return to the roles that fate had assigned. Charles went back to being the model prince. Camilla resumed her role as the wife who stood behind her husband. And Diana, though she knew everything, still had to keep smiling under thousands of eyes, still had to play the perfect daughter-in-law the royal family once praised. At this point, the tragedy was no longer a love triangle. It had become a war between image and truth, between duty and emotion, between love and betrayal. And although time passed and each person found their own way to survive, the wound from 1986 had never once healed. A journalist once bitterly remarked, "It's a story of three people living in three different prisons. Diana imprisoned by expectations, Charles imprisoned by tradition, and Camilla imprisoned by guilt." No one had the key to escape, and no one truly had the courage to break everything apart. Until the late 1980s, when the marriage between Charles and Diana had truly broken beyond repair. The love between Charles and Camilla still quietly existed unaccepted, uncelebrated, but never extinguished. They loved each other as if in rebellion against the entire world. But the price they paid was the wound they left on another woman's heart, a woman who once believed that love could save everything. And from that moment on, nothing could be saved. Diana became distant, openly defiant. Charles sank deeper into guilt and tension. And Camilla, though always trying to appear calm, was tormented by the choices she had made. That love, however real it may have been, could not escape the cold conclusion of history. It left a permanent fracture in the foundation of the royal family. Because love, even when sincere, can still become a sin when it crosses sacred vows and tramples another person's heart. And in that palace, where all emotions were boxed and framed, it was precisely those emotions that were forbidden which ended up destroying everything. Under the cold yellow lights of the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris, a horrifying crash permanently ended the life of the most beloved woman in the world. In the early morning of August 31st, 1997, Princess Diana, a symbol of compassion, rebellion, and deep loneliness, took her final breath at just 36 years old. In the car with her were her lover Dodi Al-Fayed and driver Henri Paul. All three crashed straight into a concrete pillar while trying to flee the paparazzi, and within just minutes, nothing could be saved. At Balmoral, in the cold forests of Scotland, Charles was sleeping in a quiet room when he was awakened by a phone call at dawn. The one who informed him was a close aide, voice trembling. "Sir, Princess Diana has died." The whole world seemed to freeze. Charles didn't believe it. He didn't want to believe it. He sat stunned on the bed, eyes wide open, his mind spinning like he had fallen into a nightmare. But this was no dream. This was reality. A reality like a knife plunged straight into his heart, so deep and sharp that Charles could not utter a single word. No one in the palace could forget that moment. Charles, the man who always kept his composure, cold to the point of appearing emotionless, suddenly collapsed. He sat motionless for hours, saying nothing, not moving, just staring out the fogged-up window. He buried his head in his hands. His shoulders trembled. No one heard him cry, but the tears were there. Late-coming tears, not just for Diana's death, but for the countless things he had failed to do for her while she was still alive. That very morning, Charles insisted on flying to Paris, despite fierce opposition from the royal household. "I must bring her home," he said, choked with emotion. "No matter what, she is still the mother of my children." But deeper still, there was something Charles did not dare say out loud. He owed Diana something he had never repaid in his lifetime. Respect, honesty, and the protection she should have had as his wife. At the Pitié Salpêtrière hospital, where Diana's body was held for examination, Charles walked into the cold white room, down a hallway that seemed endless. Police and doctors bowed as he passed. And then, in a small space lit only by a dim light, he faced the woman he had once vowed to love and protect. Diana lay there, peaceful as if asleep, but it was a sleep eternal. Charles stood motionless. No words, no movement. He just stared. Stared for a long time, and then he whispered something meant only for himself to hear. "I'm sorry." An apology Diana could never respond to. An apology too late, so late that even a final hug was impossible. Veteran royal reporter Richard Palmer later described the scene as one of the most heartbreaking moments in modern royal history. He said he was no longer the prince, no longer the heir to the throne. Charles at that moment was just a man facing the body of the woman he had once hurt so terribly. When news of Diana's death spread, England plunged into mourning. Thousands poured into the streets, carrying flowers, candles, and tears. Kensington Palace was flooded with a sea of white flowers. Television aired endless images of Diana, as if the entire nation was replaying memories to grasp her presence one last time. But amid that wave of grief, another wave was quietly rising: anger. People began questioning. Why did Diana have to flee paparazzi at the cost of her life? Why did the palace remain silent? Why had Charles, the man who once swore to love her, been silent for so long? And most importantly, why was Camilla, the woman always viewed as the one who shattered Diana's family, still at his side? Outrage spread through media and social networks. Newspapers splashed headlines: who really caused Diana's death? Would Diana still be alive if not for Camilla? Charles, the coldest husband in the world. Old footage resurfaced. Forgotten words reappeared. The public no longer viewed Charles with respect. They saw him as a symbol of indifference, of a betraying husband, and now a man consumed by too late remorse. Camilla, though silent publicly, also became the target of fierce criticism. In the public's eyes, she was the other woman who should never have existed. If it weren't for Camilla, Diana's marriage might have been different. Those words appeared in millions of comments. On Buckingham Palace's wall, someone scrawled in chalk, "Justice for Diana." Justice for the woman who once stood bravely, only to be crushed by those she trusted most. Charles became the target of unprecedented public anger in royal history. Crowds chanted Diana's name, demanding a public apology. Yet the royal household remained silent. Flags were not lowered. No immediate statement came from the Queen. Everything proceeded as if the palace refused to take responsibility. And that silence only poured fuel on the fire. Social commentator Naomi Fielding wrote, "Diana didn't just die in an accident. She died at the hands of a system that failed to protect her, a family that turned away, and a husband who chose another love over the heart bleeding beside him." It was this truth that turned Diana's death into not only a personal tragedy, but a national moral crisis. Amid that storm, Charles understood he was paying a price, not with the throne, but with trust, with a tarnished legacy, and with the haunted eyes of his two children, silently watching their mother's funeral amid the cold indifference of the court, especially William. That 15-year-old boy, seeing his father beside his mother's coffin, likely vowed to himself, "I will not repeat his mistake." Diana departed, taking the heart of a nation with her. She left behind a void that no one, neither Charles nor Camilla, could ever fill. Tributes to her continued endlessly, but tragically, all came after she was gone. For Charles Finby, Diana's death marked a point of no return. He could continue living. He could continue loving Camilla. He could reign, but he could never erase the name Diana from history or from his conscience, because in that fatal moment, he understood some losses, if not preserved in life, can never be redeemed. And that was far too late. After Diana's tragic death, the United Kingdom was no longer a peaceful place for Charles and Camilla. They stepped out from behind the palace curtains, not with their usual regal dignity, but into public scorn, anger, and curses. For millions, Camilla was not just a secret lover, but a destroyer, the reason a golden heart like Diana was broken and died in utter loneliness on foreign soil. People no longer whispered behind closed doors. They shouted in front of the palace gates. They held banners at train stations. They spray-painted "Camilla is to blame" on Buckingham Palace railings. To the public, the radiant girl from Windsor had become a symbol of unforgivable guilt. Charles, long torn between royal duty and personal emotion, was now swept into an unprecedented wave of criticism. Some demanded he renounce his succession rights. Others insisted he forever leave Camilla. Every step he took outside, every appearance before cameras, was met with scrutinizing stares, unkind whispers, and sometimes tears, not for him, but for the woman he no longer had a chance to apologize to. No explanation was needed. The verdict had been issued in silence, and that sentence carried no expiry date. But in this crisis, Charles refused to completely collapse. He strove to do the one thing Diana never had the chance to do: be a father. He moved closer to William and Harry, conversing with them nightly, even personally choosing their schools. Sometimes he walked through Balmoral's woods with the boys, just to let them know their father was still there. But those efforts fell short, because every time he looked into William's eyes, the son so eerily reminiscent of Diana, he saw that look of blame. William didn't need him to replace his mother. He only needed him to admit his mistakes. But Charles never spoke. Never once. Harry, still young then, clung to his father more. But that bond, too, eroded over time, as he gradually came to realize the truth: his father had betrayed his mother not only through action, but through the ruthless silence in the face of her loneliness. Once, during dinner at Highgrove, Harry confronted his father. "If Mom were still alive, would you choose Camilla?" That question pierced Charles's heart like a dagger. He didn't answer. He quietly left the table, leaving a cold plate of food and two tearful little boys behind. Famous social analyst Dr. Miriam Clark wrote, "Diana's death didn't just bury a person, it buried the public's image of the ideal royal family. And no matter how hard Charles tried, he became the living symbol of marital failure, a man born to rule, yet unable to preserve the happiness of his own wife. Charles began fading from the public eye. He grew reserved, discreet. Instead of glamorous royal events, he sought solace in gardens, charities, and ancient chapels. On one occasion, he sat in a small Wiltshire church for 3 hours without speaking. Priests later recalled him murmuring, "I wish I'd done things differently. I wish I had understood her sooner." Camilla, at this time, lived like a shadow. She no longer appeared hand in hand with Charles as in their clandestine early years. Every public appearance earned hundreds of contemptuous stares. The media dissected every move, every dress, every word she uttered. Even her not crying at Diana's funeral was scrutinized because she wasn't truly grieving. Yet who knew how many times Camilla had to steel herself? How many times she wanted to walk away? How many times she wanted to say, "I never imagined it would end like this." Amid the storm, Charles clung to Camilla not for passion as before, but as if she were the last witness of a love that had been forbidden, wounded, and now punished. They secretly met at Raymill House, away from cameras. They no longer whispered sweet nothings. They wept together. They asked each other, "Is this too high a price for a heart's choice?" Some royal advisors urged Charles to withdraw and live quietly. But he refused, not for the throne, but because he wanted to prove that people can learn from mistakes, can rise from ruins. In a short speech at the 1998 church conference, Charles hinted great losses are often our harshest teachers, but they teach us how to love properly. The crowd remained silent. Yet in some eyes, a gentleness had appeared as if they were beginning to see a different Charles. In the years that followed Israel, Charles slowly returned to royal duties. He took on more responsibilities, visited Commonwealth nations, and worked with environmental and arts organizations. He became calmer, more empathetic. Yet the shadow of the past still clung to him like an unspoken sentence. At every event, large or small, Diana's name was whispered, a haunting reminder never to fade away. In 2000, when Charles and Camilla officially married, public opinion was deeply divided. Some said, "Finally, he has the woman he loves." But many others replied, "The price of this love was another woman's life." Their wedding was not held in a grand church. There was no televised ceremony, and the Queen did not attend officially. Everything felt as though the palace had bowed to the emotional power left behind by Diana. Since then, Charles has lived between two extremes: as a devoted father, as Camilla's husband, and as a future king burdened by his past. Photos of him beside William and Harry sometimes moved the public, but others said it's just a performance. Diana isn't there to testify. In a 2017 interview, when asked if he had any regrets, Charles merely looked down and said, "There are things that will follow you all your life, whether you sit on the throne or not." Perhaps that is Charles's greatest tragedy: to be loved too late, to be understood too late, and to be forgiven, perhaps never. Historically, he may be called the king of reform, but in the hearts of millions, he will forever be the man who let a blazing heart slip away, only to receive a soul frozen forever in a cold coffin in 1997. And since that day, no matter how many carefully staged photos or PR campaigns were released, deep within the hearts of the British people, one question remains unanswered. If Charles had chosen differently, would Diana still be alive year 2024? While most of Britain was preoccupied with news surrounding the Paris Olympics and post-Brexit debates, a media earthquake suddenly swept the kingdom, not caused by a royal divorce or Prince Harry scandal, but by the withering heart of the monarch himself, King Charles III. At 75, Charles was no longer the proud young man galloping across fields or smiling brightly with Camilla at spring festivals. The cancer diagnosed that year weakened his body, but it also racked the emotional armor he had maintained for over half a century, revealing a regret-filled soul. And then During a private meeting with an old friend, someone close to both Charles and Diana, he blurted out what Britain had awaited for over 30 years. I love both women, but I betrayed one of them. Forever. That confession, meant to stay behind the thick wooden doors of Clarence's house, leaked just 3 days later. No one knows exactly who leaked it, but the reaction was explosive. Within hours, major newspapers used headlines like, "King Charles admits betraying Diana," "Belated love or desperate confession." Camilla chosen, but never the only one. Twitter quickly flooded with hashtags, "Our Charles confession," hashtag "Justice for Diana," hashtag "Too little too late." The timing was particularly sensitive. Camilla had just returned from a controversial trip to India, criticized as emotionless when asked about Harry and Meghan's children. William was fully focused on supporting Catherine's treatment and was nearly absent from official events. Harry, who had once called his father a stranger, remained completely silent. In that emotional vacuum, Charles's confession struck like a national gut punch. Political, social, and royal commentators all weighed in. A BBC analyst wrote, "Charles has spoken the truth that Britain has been afraid to face." But can truth heal when wounds have dried? Long ago, public pressure became so intense that after 5 days of royal silence, feelings that felt like 5 decades. Buckingham Palace issued an extraordinary statement. King Charles would make a televised address at 8:00 p.m. on Saturday, broadcast live across all national channels. An unprecedented move since Princess Diana's death. At exactly 8 p.m. that evening, the whole of Britain held its breath. On screen, Charles appeared. No royal robes, no Camilla, just a frail old man, deeply lined face, but eyes strangely bright. He sat there, hands gripping the armrests, voice catching, yet gaze unwavering. "People of the United Kingdom," he began, "I have remained silent for too long, and now it is time to say what should have been said many years ago." He did not read a prepared speech. He looked at no paper. His words, though sometimes shaky, were so sincere they could stir even the hardest hearts. "I love Diana, and I love Camilla. But love does not always go hand in hand with doing what's right. I made the wrong choices not just once, but many times. I left the woman I married to suffer loneliness, pressure, and pain. I failed to protect her from the palace's traps, and for that, I take responsibility." When Charles paused, his eyes were wet. For the first time since his accession, the public saw their king cry. Diana was a radiant light. I was too blind to see it in time. But I know there hasn't been a day I haven't thought of her. Not a moment I haven't asked myself, if I had acted differently, would she still be alive? After the address, social media exploded once more. Tearful comments flooded Instagram and Twitter. Some wrote, "At last, he said what the public has known for years." But many also objected. "It's too late. Diana is gone. Sorry can never bring her back." The international press immediately swung into action. The New York Times described the speech as a desperate effort by a king counting his last breaths to reclaim some peace. Le Monde called it a courageous act, but not guaranteed forgiveness. Even the Australian and Canadian press Commonwealth nations put the address on their front pages with extensive psychological, historical, and political analysis. In London, hundreds of people flocked to the palace, leaving flowers and notes reading, "We have not forgiven, but we are listening." Scholars also joined the conversation. Professor Amanda Thorne, a royal historian at Cambridge University, commented on Sky News, "This is not just a personal apology. It marks a turning point in redefining a modern monarch. Charles no longer represents untouchable power, but human vulnerability. And that, sometimes, is what moves the public." However, it cannot be denied that the speech also divided the royal family like never before. William, according to multiple sources, was not informed in advance about the plan. A friend close to the Prince of Wales shared William does not want their mother's departure to be used as an emotional tool. Meanwhile, Harry surprisingly quietly called his father immediately after the speech. The contents of the call remained undisclosed. But a few days later, Harry appeared in the UK for the first time after more than a year of estrangement. Camilla, for her part, refused to comment. An internal source revealed that she felt betrayed when Charles publicly expressed his love for Diana before the public, while she had spent her life accepting being in the background. Yet her silence was a clear sign some wounds cannot be healed with words. That speech, even though it couldn't change the past, has become an indelible milestone in the reign of Charles III. It is now taught in royal communications courses, and it has been recorded in history books under the title The Confession of a King. And in the hearts of many Britons, the question still lingers. If Charles had said those words sooner, would Diana have forgiven him? One thing is certain since that night. King Charles is no longer an untouchable icon carved from marble in history. He is human, a man who loved, erred, lost, and ultimately dared to admit his mistakes. Not before the throne, but before the heart of a nation. Spring 2025. In the quiet garden at Highgrove House, the place that once witnessed rare private moments of Prince Charles Camilla, quietly bent over a newly planted rose bush. No announcement, no cameras, no speeches, just a gentle breeze and the scent of moist earth lingering after the previous night's rain. On the small plaque beside it were three words, Rose Diana Spencer. No one knows exactly why Camilla chose that flower. But observers quickly understood it was a silent apology, belated yet sincere, from a woman who had borne the label of the rival for more than half a century. Bathed in the first light of the season, Camilla stood silently, gazing at the small rosebush taking root, as if attempting a conversation with the ghost that had haunted her life for so many years. She did not cry, but her eyes were red and tired. Perhaps that was all Camilla could do after so much pain, so many struggles, and after the painful confession her husband had delivered straight towards a past no one dared mention. Charles, at that point, could no longer leave his bed. His final days were slow-moving, nights spent by the window of his Sandringham bedroom, where he insisted on staying until his last breath. Doctors whispered in terms of weeks remaining, while William still visited regularly, quietly, and respectfully. But what Charles longed for, deep down, not the comfort of his son, nor Camilla's embrace, was a gentle vision in his dreams. It was the silhouette of Diana, the woman he failed to protect, failed to hold on to, and could no longer meet. A royal aide revealed that throughout April nights, Charles would wake in the night and whisper, Diana, I am sorry. Then he would drift back to sleep, his hand still clutching the old wedding photograph of himself and Diana, a moment that looked happy but concealed countless compromises. In a dream Charles shared with his chaplain, the only person he spoke to privately, he saw himself standing in a vast garden filled with hundreds of blooming roses. There appeared Diana, wearing a white dress, smiling gently without speaking. He ran forward, wanting to kneel and beg for forgiveness, but Diana silently turned away and walked off, leaving him amid a sea of flowers and heartbreaking silence. Charles awoke with tears on his pillow. He whispered, even in my dream, she did not forgive me. No miracle occurred in the days that followed. There was no sign of Diana's return, nor was any secret letter discovered. Only the stark truth remained: love, no matter how passionate, no matter how genuine, can be completely destroyed by wrong choices. When Charles drew his last breath on a May morning, Camilla was at Highgrove House, trimming the first blossoms of the Rose Diana Spencer bush. She received the phone call, nodded, then looked up at the sky. There were no tears, only a softly spoken sentence, so quiet that only the nearby gardener could hear. So, it's time, by Yaku. Charles's funeral was held with full royal honors. But what moved millions of people was a small detail on the flag-draped coffin. Amid the flowers from children and grandchildren, there was a single white rose, the very kind planted at Highgrove. The press later confirmed it was the Rose Diana Spencer, Sent by Camilla, no name attached. Royal historian Sir Jonathan Havers, in a speech following the funeral, concluded with a sentence that left the entire hall in silence. The tragedy of Charles, Diana, and Camilla is not a tale of love unfulfilled. It is a story of people who loved each other at the wrong time, under the unforgiving spotlight of the crown. That is the price to pay when personal affection is placed behind royal duty. And that rose bush quietly blooming in a corner of the Highgrove garden will be the final proof that love, even when dead, can still leave a scent. But forgiveness does not always arrive in time. Time, 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 time.